Thank you very much, and first apologies for not speaking in Slovenian. This is not because I'm not interested in Slovenia. In fact, in my most recent book published last year on linguistic justice for Europe and for the world, I discuss repeatedly the case of Slovenian, and in particular of the legislation which was introduced after independence in order to protect the Slovenian language. Instead, I shall speak in something that is perhaps more important even than basic income, namely basic English. Because for reasons which were alluded to by Louise, if I pronounce it properly, van der Laan, so it's so important to be able to talk across borders and to discover that we have kindred spirits, allies across borders. But in order to be able to do that efficiently, obviously we need something like a common language, which happens not to be any of the three official languages of my country, but one which nevertheless we all need to converge to in order to have conferences like this one. Right, so today I'm going to talk under the title, which I discovered beautifully, Disarmingly Simple ID. Basic income, universal basic income. What is a universal basic income? Yes, indeed, very simple. It's an income paid to every member of some community on an individual basis without means test, income test, and without work requirement. Yes, beautifully simple ID. But also, when you think of it, isn't that an incredibly stupid idea? Because think first. It says on an individual basis, that is, irrespective of the family situation. So those who propose this must be stupid enough to ignore the crucial, the obvious importance of households, families, communities. Then next, without means test. That means that the rich receive just as much as the poor. Can you think of a more stupid way of wasting precious public money, giving money to people who don't need it because they are rich? And then third, without work requirement. This means giving not only to those who work, to those who are unable to work because they are too old or too young, or because they are sick, or because they cannot find a job despite the fact that they look for one. But you are also giving this money, this same money, to those who choose not to work, to the lazies, to the do-nothings. Can you think of a more stupid way of sabotaging your economy? And even if your economy didn't suffer from it, can you think of a more perverse way of rewarding antisocial behavior? These are all good questions. But they are not the end of the story. They're only the beginning of your job as intelligent people who are able to think about social policy proposals, about the problems of the day, and about intelligent ways, sometimes subtle ways, of addressing these problems. So let's go back to each of these features. First, individual. Individual. It's given on a strictly individual basis, irrespective of the family situation. Well, compared to existing systems of social protection, a universal basic income is not at all anti-family or anti-community, but exactly the contrary. Because under the present system, which tends to take into account the family situation and therefore give less to the two members of a couple than to each member of this couple if he or she lived on their own. Under the present system, take for example a widowed or divorced woman who is on benefit and who decides to go and live with someone else. She's immediately punished by the loss or the reduction of the benefit to which she was entitled when she was on her own. If instead she gets a universal basic income, she keeps it in full, irrespective of how many other people she lives with. So instead of being something that ignores the family or is against the family, on the contrary, it's something that doesn't punish the fact that you break isolation, that you go and live with other people. And this is, of course, not the sole advantage of the strictly individual nature of a universal basic income. In Slovenia, like everywhere else in Europe and far beyond, living together as a couple is less and less synonymous with being married. This means that checking someone's household situation is less and less a simple administrative formality. In order to check who is actually cohabiting, you need to be, if you want to check it properly, you need to be more and more intrusive, and you need a procedure that's more and more intrusive, expensive, and often arbitrary. Hence, a strictly individual benefit system for these two reasons. That is, it encourages living together compared to the present system, and it enables you to have a social policy system that's far less intrusive, therefore also less arbitrary. It, after all, a strictly individual benefit system for these two reasons may not only be a beautifully simple idea, but also, in fact, and despite some appearances, quite a clever idea. Secondly, universal. That is, universal basic income is given without any means test. You don't check how high an income people draw from other sources before deciding whether a person is entitled to it or before deciding what the level of it is. Same level, same right for everyone, the rich and the poor. Isn't this stupid? For the reason I mentioned before. You give money to people who don't need it. Well, first of all, it's of course very important to see that giving to both the rich and the poor is not a way of making the rich even richer than they are. Because a basic income, it's obvious enough, needs to be funded. And even if you fund it with a tax, with a form of taxation that is not progressive, like a VAT or an energy tax, it's not as such progressive as an income tax or wealth tax could be. Even if you do that, of course, it's a linear tax or even somewhat regressive tax. Basic income funded in this way is a redistribution from the rich to the poor. Because even if the rich consume a smaller proportion of their income in a way that can be taxed by VAT, the absolute amount of what they consume is larger than what the poor consume. Often an order of magnitude larger than what the poor consume. And therefore, when you tax consumption, even if you tax consumption rather than income as such, a basic income funded in this way, universal basic income paid to the rich and the poor, is a redistribution from the rich and the poor, in the sense that the rich fund their own basic income and more, whereas the poor receive the basic income and contribute to it through taxation on their consumption, but far less than the amount they receive in form of basic income. Secondly, and perhaps a bit less obvious to understand, but really crucial in the argument for basic income. Secondly, giving to the rich and not only to the poor is not meant to be better for the rich, but better for the poor. Why? This looks paradoxical. This is centrally related to a theme that is central in the whole discussion on basic income, which is the so-called poverty trap, or unemployment trap, or dependency trap. There are various names for it, but the idea is very simple to understand. Under the standard minimum income social protection scheme which exists currently, when you are poor, you receive a benefit just because you are poor. If you start earning a little bit of money by getting a job, and then the job improves somewhat and you get a bit more income, or your spouse gets a bit more income, you are immediately sanctioned again, punished through the withdrawal of the benefit to which you were entitled only because you were poor. And this is a so-called unemployment trap or poverty trap, because you only get the benefit because you are poor. So if you are a bit less than poor, immediately each euro you earn is then withdrawn, or it's kept under some complicated conditions. And so what a universal basic income does is replace the safety net in which you tend to get stuck by a safety floor on which you can stand firmly. Because you have it irrespective of your income that may fluctuate quite a bit from one month to another. You get it, you are sure you get it, each member of your family gets it, and this is really something on which you can stand to build your life. If you improve gradually your situation, you know you can count on it. And this is really important, so that it's important to see that this is crucial for the poor, because poverty is not only a static matter of how much income you have earned at the end of a month, but it's also in terms of the prospects you have in front of you. And if, as a prospect, you have the security of this firm floor on which you can stand, this is of crucial importance for the poor. So in this sense, giving this money, giving this grant to the rich as well as to the poor it's not done because it's better for the rich. It's done because it's better for the poor. That's the second aspect of it, and namely the universal character. What then about the third feature, the unconditional nature of the basic income? I said strictly individual, irrespective of the family. It's universal, irrespective of income from other sources. And it's also unconditional in the sense that it's not subjected to a condition of work or willingness to work and to accept employment on the part of the beneficiaries. Well, why? And so at first sight you say, well, this is ridiculous, this is going to weaken our economy. But is this so clear? Think about the following two aspects. First one, and always been struck, in fact it's a Dutch professor of social medicine at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam at the end of the 1970s, who put this argument very well at the very beginning of the European discussion on basic income. Well, there are some people who are sick because they work too much. Perhaps there are some in this room. There are some people who are sick because they work too much. And they have to keep working under present circumstances so much, because if they took a break, if they reduce their working time, this would be in no way compensated by a benefit, because under the current circumstances, under the current systems, you only get a benefit if you are involuntarily unemployed. So you have to keep working. You realize you work too much, but you'll only be able to stop work if when you are really sick and the doctor can say, this man has a burnout, this man is depressed, or this woman is depressed, and therefore he has to get out of work. But you can't do so before it's too late, voluntarily. And other people are sick because they keep applying for jobs which don't exist because they are occupied by all these people who work too much. And if they have to keep applying and show they are looking for a job, they know it will lead to nothing. And as a result of that, they are sick because they are constantly expected to do something which they know they can't get. Wouldn't there, therefore, be something to be gained in terms of economic efficiency from a more relaxed labor market with a modest basic income, creating conditions for some being able to leave some of their job, to relinquish some of their jobs by taking a career break at the right time, which could then be taken up by all these people who are looking for a job and can't find one. This is the idea that a basic income, modest basic income, can serve as a sort of non-authoritarian form of work sharing, of job sharing. You achieve it not by imposing a limit of 30 hours or 25 hours on the number of hours you can work every week, but by giving the possibility to people to reduce their working time when they feel it's time to do it, and other people then to take the jobs which are thereby freed. So for this first reason, and so sort of more relaxed working of the labor market, after all giving this money unconditionally and without restricting it to the people who are looking for a job, who are really involuntarily unemployed, may be a clever strategy in purely economic terms. But there is still more important still in terms of the contribution of a basic income to the efficiency of the economy. Because what is important, and what is most important under current conditions for our economies, is not that people should be employed full-time from day one after the end of their studies to the legal retirement age, except in the periods when they are sick. What is important, most important under current conditions, is that these people, workers, potential workers, should be properly educated throughout their lives in such a way that they can be productive, that they can be civil, and that they can be healthy practically from cradle to grave, from even before the end of their studies to well after the legal retirement age. In other words, the economic evaluation of social policies today must be conducted far less in terms of their impact on the labor supply, on a snapshot picture of how much people supply their labor to the economy, far less in those terms, and far more in terms of the impact of these social policies on human capital. And what difference does a universal basic income make in this respect? Precisely because of its unconditionality, but also combined with the universality, it is that the basic income facilitates a flexible, easy back and forth between and throughout life between work, employment, including self-employment, cooperative employment, between work, education or training, and family, particular childcare. You have this floor of income that makes it possible then not to go from work to training by reducing your working time, go back from training into work, or reduce your working time because the time is ripe and it's important that you should spend more time with your children because they need it. And this will make, this easy back and forth, will make not only for healthier, more balanced children, it will also make it possible for young people to take internships, often poorly paid or not paid at all, even when they don't have the privilege of being supported by their parents beyond the time of their studies. And now access to an internship for many jobs after your studies is essential, but the only people who can do it is the people whose parents are willing to fund them for 2 more years after their studies. The people who don't have parents to help them simply don't have access to that and have to accept any job, and including give up the calling they had, all the things they studied for, in order to accept just anything in order to survive. Only those who have the privilege of having some sort of basic income from their parents can then proceed and then realize what they really wanted to do with life. Well, if you have a basic income, you generalize this possibility by making it possible for all these people to access to this further training, apprenticeships, internships after their study. Moreover, because of this easy back and forth, it's important for human capital. One, I said, because you can then spend more time, decide to spend more time with your children by interrupting your career, reducing your working time at less cost than is now the case when they're needed, and this may be crucial for the future mental health and the development of your children. One. Two, it's important because for young people it will make it easy for them to get high training occupations after their studies. And three, at every point in your life it will make it easier without administrative complications to reduce your working time, again without a big loss in income for your family, in order to get further training, possibly in a completely different area from the one in which you were working before, so that you avoid the burnout, so that you can retrain before your skills become obsolete. So many people then are out of work forever at the age of 45 or 50 because there is no more business in the sector of the economy in which they were working, and then they go from unemployment benefit to early retirement, etc. Instead, if they could, before it's too late, retrain, they'll be able to work longer. Big problem about early people not working long enough in Europe has less to do with the legal retirement age than with the fact that people cannot retrain in time in order to be able then to work for longer afterwards. So, after all, to sum this up, strictly individual may look silly, but in fact it's not silly at all, because it avoids trapping people in situations of isolation. Two, universal, rich and poor. It's not so silly after all, because it avoids trapping people in situations of dependency, of poverty. And three, unconditional. It's not so silly either, even economically speaking, because it only looks silly on an obsolete picture of the economy. But because the obsolete picture of the economy in which what looked crucial was to compel people to keep their job or to accept any job. And you thought that this was better for the economy, but instead today it's far more important to give people considerable leeway for getting education for themselves and providing education to others, and thereby expanding society's human capital. So, is basic income out of trouble after this argument, which I quickly stretched? No, it's not. Why not? Because number of people would be willing to concede. It's not silly at all, economically speaking, under current conditions. The problem is not that, they say, with basic income. The problem is that a basic income is immoral. It's immoral. Giving to some the possibility of getting an income without doing anything useful is immoral, unjust, scandalous. And even if quite a number of people would do something quite useful with that time, the fact that some people would misuse it in order just to be lazy is morally unacceptable. And indeed, for many people, the main objection to basic income. The reason why they don't even want to consider it, even after having clarified all the misunderstandings, which I tried to quickly clarify earlier, many people say, well, that's not a problem. It's the paramount objection is that it is morally unacceptable. Now, is that a silly objection? No, it's not. And I consider this indeed a fundamental objection, so fundamental that I devoted to it the biggest book I ever wrote and I shall ever write in my life. And the title of this book is also my basic answer to that objection. The title is Real Freedom for All. You could say, and that ties up, I think, both with what was said in the introduction and I think with the next talk, this could be said and is clearly a liberal answer to the objection. But watch out, it's a truly liberal answer to that objection. That is truly liberal in the sense that it cares not just for formal freedom, that is the sheer right to do things. What do you do with the sheer right to do things when you don't have the resources to do what you would like to do with your life, when you don't have the power? So this is not about the justification for a basic income. And indeed, any plausible conception of justice must not be about the sheer formal right, but about the sheer formal freedom, but about real freedom. Not only the right, but the power, the real possibility to do things, and for everyone, not just for the rich. So the reason, and the fundamental reason why I believe that a universal basic income is not only economically efficient when it's funded in the right way, pitched at the right level, it's not only economically efficient, but it's also fundamentally just. That is because justice consists in giving as much real freedom as is sustainable for the worst off, for the people with least real freedom. That ties in and then with a liberal perspective, with the idea, fundamental idea, that it's for people to decide what to do with their lives, but it's for society to distribute the means to do whatever you wish to do with your life. Pursuit of happiness as defined by each of us. It's for society to distribute these resources in a fair way. An essential aspect, not the only aspect, free and good education is also part of it, healthcare, etc. A central aspect of it is an unconditional basic income. Let me just finish by saying, and I may be able to develop that a bit more in my contribution to the panel this afternoon. Let me just say this about the current crisis context in Europe and why I believe that for a completely new reason, basic income has become particularly relevant. Of course, however beautiful an idea, and beautifully simple, disarmingly simple, it may look to a philosopher, this will not be sufficient for basic income to be implemented in reality. We need a vision, we need a justification for it, a fundamental justification for it, but at the same time we need to be able to use opportunities. And I believe that the current crisis of the euro, not speaking about the financial crisis generally, the current crisis of the euro is one of those unexpected opportunities. Let me quickly, and so my remaining couple of minutes, say why in very elliptic form. And because it's really the succession of 5 convictions that led me to believing this. Statement one, is that as the experience of the US, the dollar zone in the United States, versus the experience of the euro has taught us, one, there is no sustainable common currency among states that may be quite diverse without 2 major buffers, one or both of 2 major buffers against divergences between the various states. These 2 major buffering mechanisms are interstate migration, migration between states, and interstate transfers, transfers from people in one state to transfer in another. That's proposition number one. Proposition number two is that in Europe, there is not much to expect. There is a bit to expect, but not much from interstate migration. In the US, it's about, depending on the assessments, migration between states is between 6 and 7 times higher and more intense than between states, member states of the European Union. Given, proposition 2 is that given that there is very little to expect from interstate migration, we must expect far more from interstate transfers as a buffering mechanism. 3, interstate transfers will never take the form of a mega European-wide welfare state, analogous to the American federal welfare state. The bulk of redistribution in the US is organized at a federal level. We'll never have that, and so the only chance is to operate at the level of not of the pensions, the healthcare system, but at the level of a minimum income scheme. That's proposition number 3. Proposition number 4, a transnational minimum income scheme cannot be means tested for reasons that are related to what I said earlier, but also because it's simply impossible to design and implement a means test that would be homogeneous and politically acceptable across states. Therefore, this minimum income scheme must be universal, that is, it must be something like a universal basic income. And 5th proposition, you need to fund this this universal basic income, this euro dividend as I call it, and I believe that such a scheme cannot be funded, will never be funded through an income tax, for reasons analogous to the reasons why no means test can be implemented. Income taxation is extremely differentiated between states and very politically sensitive. It won't be funded by a Tobin tax, however promising the current moves are, because it would yield only revenues that would be too small. In the most optimistic perspectives, a maximum of 10 euros per month. It won't be funded by a carbon tax, because again, the yield would be too small. The only promising way of funding it is a European-wide value-added tax at a much higher level than what is currently the case, and of course with readjustment of the tax and benefit systems in each country, so that the VAT rate would not need to increase, or to increase that much in each situation. So that's just a hint, and so I'm not developing this, and so, but I believe that each of these 5 propositions is really strong. There is much to be said for it, and if you believe in each of the 5, there is really a need for what I call a euro dividend, a European-wide universal basic income. And so that's what we need to do constantly, and of course things don't happen just overnight. We need to persist and to argue and to speak with many citizens, not only those who are convinced, by combining this vision about what a just society would be with the basic income at its core or at its basis on the one hand, but we also need to seize opportunities at every level, the level of a country like Slovenia, but also at the European level and even at the global level. Thank you.